I am Victoria, 32 years old, and the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, a global shipping empire I built from a struggling family business into a billion-dollar fortress. I deal in steel contracts, international maritime law, and high-stakes negotiations that would make most men crumble, yet the most dangerous negotiation of my life didn't happen in a boardroom. It started in my own living room overlooking Central Park. My sister Maya, an airline pilot for Aerolux, called me on a secure line, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "I need to ask you something strange," she whispered. "Is your husband home right now?" I frowned, looking at the security feed on my tablet. "Yes," I replied. "Jason is sitting in the living room watching the game and drinking a beer." "Why?" Maya took a sharp breath that sounded like a sob. "That cannot be true, because I am watching him right now. He just boarded my flight to Rome, first class seat 1A. And Victoria, he is with another woman. They are holding hands." Just then I heard the heavy oak door of my home office click open behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I stared at the screen of my tablet where the live feed showed the man in my living room scratching his chin and reaching for the remote control. The man behind me cleared his throat. "Honey, are you almost done with work?" The voice was Jason's. The inflection was Jason's. The scent of expensive sandalwood cologne that wafted into the room was the one I bought him for Christmas. Yet Maya's voice in my ear was absolute. She was the most observant person I knew, trained to spot microscopic cracks in airplane fuselages. If she said my husband was on her plane, then my husband was on her plane, which meant the person standing 10 feet behind me in my penthouse, the person I had shared a bed with for the last 3 nights, was a stranger. My heart did not race, my hands did not shake. Instead, a cold, heavy silence settled over me, the same feeling I get right before I acquire a rival company. I hung up the phone. Without another word, I stood up and smoothed the skirt of my dress, turning to face the man who wore my husband's face. He was leaning against the doorframe, smiling that charming, lopsided smile that had won me over 5 years ago. But now that I was looking for it, I saw the glitch. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His posture was slightly too slouchy for a man who claimed to be a former collegiate athlete. I walked past him, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. "I'm going down for a glass of wine," I said, my voice steady, almost bored. "Do you want one?" "Sure, babe," he replied, following me out onto the landing. "Make it a red." That single word stopped me dead on the stairs. "Babe?" Jason never called me babe. He called me Vic or Victoria, or when he was trying to be funny, Madam CEO. He hated pet names. He found them common. But this man threw the word out casually like a reflex. I continued descending the spiral staircase, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. Identity theft, hallucination, a psychotic break, or something far more sinister and calculated. I reached the marble island of our kitchen, the kitchen I had paid for with the bonus from the Shanghai merger. I pulled a bottle of vintage Cabernet from the rack and selected a crystal glass. The man sat on the bar stool opposite me, watching me with a gaze that felt predatory. I poured the wine, watching the crimson liquid swirl. I decided to test him one last time before I executed my move. So I said casually, keeping my eyes on the glass, "Did you remember to wire the property tax for the Hamptons house today?" The deadline was at noon. He didn't blink. "Oh yeah, totally forgot. I will handle it tomorrow morning. Babe, don't worry about it." I gripped the stem of the glass tighter. Jason knew we had sold the Hamptons house 4 months ago to buy the villa in Tuscany. It was a test, and he had failed spectacularly. My grip tightened until the crystal stem snapped. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Wine spilled over my hand like fresh blood, and shards of glass scattered across the countertop. The man jumped up, his eyes wide with fake concern. "Jesus, Victoria, are you okay? Let me get a towel." "Stay right there," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a woman who commanded fleets of ships. He froze. The facade slipped for a fraction of a second, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I picked up the largest shard of broken glass, a jagged dagger of crystal, and pointed it directly at his throat. "Who are you?" I asked calmly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He laughed nervously, taking a step back. "What are you talking about, babe? It is me, Jason. Have you been working too long? Stop freaking me out." I took a step forward, the glass inches from his jugular. "My husband is currently at 30,000 feet on a flight to Rome. This penthouse has biometric security that logs every entry and exit. So tell me who you are and how you bypassed my system, or I will call the private security team downstairs and have them remove you as an intruder. And trust me, they do not ask questions." The man's face changed. It was fascinating and horrifying to watch. The arrogance drained away, replaced by the desperate, shifting eyes of a cornered animal. His shoulders slumped, and suddenly he looked smaller, less imposing. "Look, lady, calm down. Okay." He put his hands up in surrender. "I am not here to hurt you. I am an actor. My name is Julian. Before I tell you exactly how a stranger ended up living in my house and what I did to make him regret the day he was born. If you believe that a woman's intuition is the most dangerous weapon on earth, hit that subscribe button right now. We are about to unravel a betrayal so deep it makes ordinary affairs look like child's play." Julian, the man standing in my kitchen, was trembling slightly. He confessed everything in a rush of words, desperate to avoid the police. Apparently, he had a warrant out for unpaid gambling debts in New Jersey. Jason had found him 6 months ago. At an underground poker game, Jason had noticed the uncanny resemblance. Immediately, the same jawline, the same nose, the same build. It turned out Julian was a distant cousin on Jason's father's side, a biological fluke that Jason decided to exploit. Jason offered to pay off Julian's debts and give him a salary of $10,000 a month for a simple job, to be Jason's stand-in. The plan was sickeningly brilliant. Jason taught Julian his mannerisms, his walk, and his voice. For the last half year, whenever Jason wanted to go on a lavish trip with his mistress or conduct shady business deals, he would swap places with Julian. Julian would stay at the house, attend the boring charity galas, nod politely at my business dinners, and sleep in the guest room, claiming he had insomnia or a bad back to avoid intimacy with me. As I listened to this stranger narrate the last 6 months of my life, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt a cold, clinical rage. I realized that the times I thought my husband was being distant or quiet, it was actually this stranger trying not to blow his cover. The times I had vented about my day to him and received generic responses. I was talking to a paid actor, but the betrayal went deeper than just physical presence. Julian admitted that Jason was currently flying to Rome, not just for a romantic getaway with a woman named Tiffany, but to visit a private bank. Jason had been siphoning money from my accounts using the time Julian bought him to forge my signature on transfer authorizations. He was planning to empty the joint trust fund $50 million and disappear, leaving me with a fake husband and a drained account. I looked at Julian, the cheap copy of the man I had married. "You are going to help me?" I said, placing the shard of glass down on the counter and picking up a napkin to wipe the wine from my hand. "You are an actor, right?" Julian nodded, swallowing hard. "Well, Julian, get ready for the performance of a lifetime. You are not going to jail. Not yet. You are going to help me destroy him." I checked my watch. The flight to Rome was 8 hours long. I had a private jet on standby at Teterboro Airport that could make the trip in 6.5. If I left now, I could beat them there. I looked at the trembling man in my kitchen. "Go upstairs and pack a bag," I ordered. "You are coming with me. We are going to Rome to introduce Jason to his long-lost twin. And when we are done, he will wish he had never boarded that plane." This was not just about infidelity anymore. This was about my dignity, my empire, and my money. And nobody steals from Victoria and gets away with it. I did not need to use rope or zip ties to secure Julian, because physical restraint is for people who lack leverage. I prefer financial chains, which are far stronger and leave no bruises. I looked at the man shivering in my designer kitchen and made a calculation. He was not a villain. He was a desperate man, drowning in debt, and Jason had thrown him a lifeline that was actually a noose, Julian, I said, my voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel. "Jason is paying you $10,000 a month, correct?" Julian nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. I pulled my checkbook from my bag, the leather soft under my fingers. I wrote a check for $50,000 and slid it across the marble counter toward him. "This is a signing bonus," I said calmly. "You work for me now, and if you do exactly what I say, you will never have to worry about gambling debts again. But if you try to run my security team, we'll find you before you reach the elevator. Do we have an agreement?" Julian looked at the check, his eyes widening. He had likely never seen that many zeros in one place. He swallowed hard and nodded. "We have an agreement, ma'am," he whispered. "Good," I said, checking my watch. "Now sit down and be quiet. I have a war council to convene." I walked into my home office and locked the door behind me. The room was soundproofed, a necessity for the level of business I conducted daily. I sat at my mahogany desk and initiated a triple, encrypted video link to the only two people on this planet I trusted with my life. The screen flickered to life, revealing two faces split down the middle. On the left was Maya, my sister wearing her pilot's headset, the ambient hum of the cockpit in the background. On the right was Marcus, my brother-in-law, sitting in his darkened server room in D.C., his face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple monitors. Marcus was a forensic accountant for the Bureau, and a man who could find a digital footprint in a sandstorm. Maya spoke first, her voice low but crystal clear due to the noise-canceling microphone. "Victoria, I am at 30,000 feet. The autopilot is on. We are 4 hours from Rome. Jason is in seat 1. Drinking champagne. The woman is in 1B. She is young, maybe 24. Her name is Tiffany based on the manifest. They are celebrating something loudly. They are celebrating my bankruptcy," I said, my tone flat. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Jason is not just having an affair. He has a doppelganger named Julian sitting in my kitchen right now. Jason has used him to bypass my supervision for 6 months. I need you to access the main trust fund accounts immediately, specifically the offshore holdings managed through the Zurich branch." Marcus didn't gasp or ask questions. He began typing furiously, the sound of his mechanical keyboard echoing, like gunfire, rapid and precise. "Give me 2 minutes, Vic," Marcus said, his eyes scanning lines of code reflected in his glasses. "If he is moving that kind of volume, he needs high-level clearance. Does he have your biometric data?" I paused, thinking back to the times Jason had asked to borrow my phone, or the times he had been strangely helpful with my laptop. "He doesn't have my eyes or my fingerprints," I said. "But he might have a backdoor key. I suspect he forged a power of attorney document." Marcus kept typing, his expression turning grim. "Got it," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I see a pending transfer initiated 48 hours ago. $50 million from the Vanguard Trust aimed at a private numbered account in Rome. The transaction is in a holding pattern. It requires a final physical verification at the destination bank, specifically a retinal scan and a secondary password. That is why he is flying there. He needs to be physically present to unlock the vault." "So we have time," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline that felt deceptively like calm. "He cannot touch the money until the bank opens in Rome tomorrow morning. Marcus, I want you to freeze nothing. Let the transaction sit there pending. If we block it now, he will get a notification on his phone and he will run. We need him to walk into that bank thinking he has won. We need him to feel the money in his fingertips before we slam the steel door on his hand. Can you monitor his credit cards in real time?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied with a dark smile. "I can see every coffee, every toll booth, and every hotel reservation. In fact, I can do more than monitor. I can manipulate. But I will wait for your command." I turned my attention to the left side of the screen. "Maya, I need you to execute phase 1 of the psychological breakdown. Jason needs to be terrified before he lands. He needs to be so paranoid that he makes mistakes. But you cannot be obvious. He cannot know I am onto him. If he suspects, I know he might abort the trip and disappear in Italy with whatever cash he has on hand. I want you to make his flight a living hell. Subtle psychological torture." Maya's eyes narrowed and a fierce protective glint appeared in them. "Copy that, sister. I can control the cabin environment specifically for the first-class section. I can drop the temperature around his seat just enough to make him shiver without freezing the other passengers. I can instruct the flight attendants to be clumsy with his service, delay his drinks, or spill a little water on that expensive suit and the seatbelt sign. Maya paused, a wicked smirk touching her lips. The air is smooth up here, but I can make the plane dance a little, just enough to rattle the nerves of a guilty man, specifically when he tries to sleep. Perfect, I said. Use the turbulence to isolate him. Keep him away from his phone. Make the connection spotty. I don't want him contacting Julian. When he lands, I want him exhausted, hungry, and on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Marcus, keep tracking the money and prepare a dossier for the Italian financial police. I want enough evidence to bury him for 20 years, not just for theft, but for fraud and identity theft. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I am taking the G650. I will be in Rome before he checks into his hotel. The three of us are going to close this net so tight he won't even be able to breathe. Marcus nodded once and cut the feed. Maya adjusted her headset and signed off, ready to turn a luxury flight into a nightmare for my husband. I walked back out to the kitchen where Julian was sitting, staring at the check I had given him. He looked up as I entered, looking like a lost puppy waiting for a command. "Get up, Julian," I said, grabbing my car keys. "We are going to the airport, but first you are going to shower and shave. We are going to turn you into a gentleman, because when we walk into that bank in Rome, you need to look more like the CEO of a company than the man who is trying to steal it. You are my asset now, Julian. And I take very good care of my assets as long as they perform. Welcome to the team. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, my sister Maya was turning the first-class cabin of Aerolux Flight 409 into a pressure cooker, while I listened from the safety of my home office, watching the digital flight path update on my monitor. Maya told me later exactly how it went down, and I could envision every detail as if I were standing right there in the galley waiting to strike. Maya adjusted her uniform, ensuring her captain's bars were gleaming under the cabin lights, and stepped out of the cockpit. She had left the controls to her first officer for a brief meet and greet, a standard procedure for VIP flights. But today, it was a calculated act of psychological warfare. She walked down the aisle, the plush carpet silencing her footsteps, nodding to passengers with the practiced grace of a woman who commanded a flying machine worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She approached row 1, where Jason was sitting comfortably in seat 1, sipping champagne with a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. Tiffany, the woman in the red dress, sat next to him, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Maya stopped directly in front of them, blocking the light from the overhead bin. Jason looked up, annoyed at the interruption, ready to dismiss a flight attendant asking about a refill. But when his eyes locked onto the woman standing above him, the color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical blow. His hand spasmed, sending a splash of champagne onto his expensive Italian trousers. He choked on his drink, coughing violently, while Maya simply smiled, a cold, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," Maya said, her voice smooth and carrying just enough volume for the surrounding passengers to hear. "It is a pleasure to have you flying with us again to Rome." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "I noticed you are traveling with a companion today. Usually you are flying solo on business." She glanced at Tiffany, who had looked up with interest, scanning Maya's face for any sign of threat. Jason was paralyzed. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He knew exactly who Maya was. He knew she was my sister. He just hadn't known she was the captain of this specific flight. It was a coincidence so improbable that he likely thought he was hallucinating, or that I had orchestrated the entire universe against him. He opened his mouth to stammer a reply, but no sound came out, just a dry croak. Maya didn't let him recover. She leaned in slightly, resting a hand on the back of his seat, looking down at him with the benevolent pity of an executioner. "I just wanted to personally inform you that we might experience some unexpected turbulence over the Atlantic tonight. The air currents are unpredictable, kind of like life, isn't it, Mr. Brooks? 1 minute you are cruising smoothly and the next, Everything drops out from under you, so please keep your seatbelt fastened tight. We wouldn't want anyone getting hurt when things fall apart." She lingered for a second longer, her eyes drilling into his soul before nodding politely to Tiffany. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," and turned on her heel, walking back toward the cockpit with the confidence of a queen. Jason was left trembling in his seat, wiping champagne off his pants with a shaking hand, his heart undoubtedly hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was the first crack in the dam. Maya's presence had destroyed his sense of anonymity. He was no longer a wealthy businessman on a secret romantic getaway. He was a target under surveillance, trapped in a metal tube miles above the earth, with nowhere to run. But the real damage wasn't just his fear of Maya, it was what his fear signaled to the woman sitting next to him. Tiffany was young, but she was not blind. She was a creature of instinct, trained to sniff out insecurity and weakness in the men she dated. She had watched the entire interaction. She saw the way Jason's face had gone ghostly white. She saw the way his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold his glass. She saw the terror in his eyes when the pilot mentioned turbulence, a terror that seemed disproportionate to a simple weather warning. "Why are you acting so weird?" Tiffany asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the engines. "Do you know her? Is she an ex-girlfriend or something?" She narrowed her eyes, looking at Jason with newfound suspicion. "You looked like you saw a ghost." Jason tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous wheeze. "Don't be ridiculous, Tiff. She is just the pilot. I just hate flying. You know that I get nervous." "You fly all the time." Tiffany countered, her tone accusing. "You told me you fly to Europe twice a month for business. You never get nervous. And why did you spill your drink? You are sweating." "Jason, wipe your forehead. You look disgusting." She reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched, pulling away as if her touch burned him. He was spiraling, thinking about Maya in the cockpit, thinking about me back in New York, thinking about whether Maya had already radioed ahead to the police. He grabbed his phone from the tray table, his movements jerky and frantic. He needed to check his messages. He needed to see if Julian had texted him a warning. He needed to access his banking app to make sure the pending transfer was still valid. But his frantic behavior only fueled Tiffany's paranoia. She grabbed his wrist, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his skin. "Who are you trying to text?" Tiffany hissed, her voice rising, causing a few passengers across the aisle to glance over. "Are you texting your wife? Is that what this is? You said it was over, Jason. You said she was out of the picture. So why are you shaking like a leaf and clutching that phone, like it is a life raft? Let me see it." "No," Jason snapped, pulling his arm back with force, his voice cracking. "Stop it, Tiff. Everyone is looking." Tried to shove the phone into his jacket pocket, but he fumbled and it slid between the seats. He scrambled to retrieve it, desperation etched on every feature of his face. He was terrified that if she saw the screen, she wouldn't see a text from a wife. She would see a message from Julian, or worse, a notification from the bank regarding a $50 million transfer that wasn't his money. The cabin became a cage for him. On one side, he had the cockpit where my sister was controlling his fate. On the other side, he had a suspicious mistress who was realizing she might have bet on a losing horse. And inside his own head, the paranoia was eating him alive. He ordered another drink, gulping it down before the flight attendant had even finished pouring, trying to drown the rising panic. But alcohol couldn't wash away the realization that the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was quiet, controlled, and deadly. I had returned to the kitchen where Julian was waiting, having finished his shower and shaved per my instructions. He looked remarkably like Jason, now clean-shaven, and wearing one of Jason's spare suits I had retrieved from the closet. The resemblance was uncanny, but the eyes were different. Julian's eyes held a mixture of gratitude and fear, whereas Jason's were usually filled with entitlement. I poured Julian a cup of black coffee and leaned against the counter. My arms crossed. "Tell me the rest," I commanded. "You said he was going to Rome for money, but $50 million doesn't just sit in a checking account. How exactly was he planning to extract it? The devil is in the details, Julian, and if we are going to beat him, I need to know the mechanism of the theft." Julian took a sip of the coffee, his hands steadier now that he had a mission. "It is the trust fund. he said, his voice low. "The Vanguard Family Trust. He told me that you have a clause in the trust agreement that allows for emergency withdrawals if both trustees are physically present at the Zurich branch in Rome." I frowned. "That is true," I said. "But I am the other trustee. I am here, not in Rome." Julian nodded. "Exactly. That is why he needed me. He spent 3 months practicing your signature, Victoria. He has sheets and sheets of paper in his briefcase filled with your name. He hired a forger to teach him the exact pressure points, the loops, the slant. He got so good he could sign your name better than you can. But the signature is only half of it. He needed the biometric override." My blood ran cold. The biometric override was a failsafe meant to protect the family fortune. It required a retinal scan or a fingerprint. But how could he bypass that? "He has a copy of your fingerprints," Julian confessed. "He lifted a glass from a dinner party 3 months ago. He used a kit he bought on the dark web to create a synthetic latex mold. He has a thin film on his thumb right now that matches your print perfectly." I stared at Julian, feeling a mix of horror and begrudging, respect for the sheer audacity of the plan. Jason, who couldn't remember to load the dishwasher, had orchestrated a high-tech heist. He wasn't just stealing from me, he was impersonating me. He was going to walk into that bank, scan his own retina as himself, and then use the fake thumbprint to authorize my half of the withdrawal, claiming I was incapacitated or had granted him power of attorney. And with the forged documents he had prepared, he would have walked out with $50 million in untraceable bearer bonds. "So the plan," I said slowly, piecing it together, "is that he goes into the bank tomorrow morning, uses the fake print signs, the forged documents, and claims the emergency withdrawal. And because the bank manager in Rome is an old friend of his father's, he thinks he can smooth talk his way through any red tape." Julian nodded. "That is it. Once he has the bonds, he plans to fly to the Cayman Islands. He has a charter plane waiting in Rome. He is not coming back. Victoria, he was never coming back." The finality of those words hung in the air. He was never coming back. He was going to leave me to deal with the financial ruin, the scandal, and the heartbreak while he lived like a king on my hard-earned money with his mistress. The sheer cruelty of it snapped something inside me. Any lingering hesitation I had about destroying him evaporated. I looked at Julian, the man who was supposed to be my husband's pawn. "You said he has a charter plane waiting to take him to the Caymans." Julian nodded. "Good," I said, a cold smile touching my lips, "because we are going to need a plane to leave Rome after we are done with him. But he won't be on it. We are going to that bank, Julian, and you are going to help me shut down this heist from the inside. But first we need to get to the airport. My jet is fueled and waiting." I grabbed my purse and the dossier of evidence Marcus had sent to my printer. The game was no longer about saving my marriage. It was about saving my empire. Jason thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize he was playing against the woman who built the board. He was trapped in the sky, terrified, and drinking himself into a stupor, while I was on the ground, moving pieces into position to checkmate him the moment he touched down on Italian soil. The race to Rome had officially begun, and I had no intention of coming in second. I stood in the center of my living room with my passport in one hand and a burner phone in the other, while Julian stood by the elevator, looking like a terrified child in a bespoke suit. The air in the penthouse was still thick with the revelation of the identity theft, but the real blow was about to land. Marcus's face appeared on my tablet screen again, and this time he wasn't typing. He was staring directly at the camera with a look of absolute gravity that made my stomach tighten. Marcus was a man who had seen cartel finances and terrorist funding networks without blinking, so if he looked worried, I knew the situation was catastrophic. "Victoria, look at the screen," Marcus said, his voice stripping away all pleasantries. "I am sharing my desktop with you right now. You need to see exactly what this transfer is, because it is not just a simple withdrawal. It is a liquidation event." I looked down at the tablet. The screen displayed a complex web of banking nodes and transaction logs, vivid red lines cutting across the digital map of Europe. At the center was a flashing prompt labeled Swift MT103 Pending Authorization. The amount was staggering, $50 million, but it wasn't the number that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the source account. He is not taking it from the family savings, Victoria Marcus explained, his voice grim. He is draining the Vanguard Operating Capital Trust. That is your liquidity. That is the money used to pay for fuel dock fees and payroll for the entire fleet. If this transfer goes through tomorrow morning, Vanguard Logistics is insolvent by noon. Your ships will be impounded at every port from Singapore to Rotterdam. You won't just be poor. You will be buried under international lawsuits for breach of contract. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold clarity wash over me. This wasn't just greed. Jason wasn't just trying to run away with a nest egg to start a new life with his mistress. He was trying to murder my company. He knew exactly what that account was. We had discussed it over dinner months ago when I was stressed about a fuel price surge. He knew that account was the beating heart of my empire, and he was aiming a dagger right at it. The status is pending. Marcus continued, pointing to a flashing yellow icon. It is holding for biometric verification at the receiving bank in Rome, specifically the retinal scan and a physical key fob code, which I assume he stole from your safe. The system is waiting for him to walk through the doors of the Swiss private bank branch on Via Veneto precisely at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If he passes that scan, the money moves instantly. It is an irrevocable wire. Once it hits the offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands, it is gone. It will be washed through 1,000 crypto wallets before we can even blink. My mind raced, calculating the timeline and the stakes. Jason was currently over the Atlantic, terrified and drinking champagne, unaware that I was looking at the gun he had pointed at my head. The sheer malice of his plan was breathtaking. He wanted to leave me too broken to chase him. He wanted me fighting off creditors and bankruptcy lawyers while he sipped martinis on a beach. It was a personal destruction disguised as a robbery. Marcus's voice cut through my thoughts, urgent and sharp. Victoria, I can kill the transfer right now. I have back-end access. I can flag it for fraud and lock the account. The bank will freeze the funds and he will walk into that branch and get a rejection notice. We save the money. The company is safe. Give me the order and I will execute the freeze. My finger hovered over the tablet. The logical safe choice was to stop the bleeding immediately. To freeze the assets, protect the company, and let Jason rot in Rome with no money. But if I did that, Jason would know the moment he landed. He would get a notification on his phone that the transfer failed. He would know the game was up. He wouldn't go to the bank. He would ditch Tiffany, ditch the fake passport, and disappear into the European underground. He would be a ghost, and I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when he would come back to finish the job. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but echoing loudly in the silent room. Do not freeze it, Marcus. Marcus paused, his fingers freezing over his keyboard. Victoria, listen to me. If he beats you to that bank, if his plane lands early, or if your jet has a mechanical issue, he wins. He takes the $50 million and you lose everything. The risk is too high. It is a calculated risk, I replied, lifting my head to look at Julian, who was watching me with wide eyes. If we freeze the money he runs, I don't just want to save the money, Marcus. I want him. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes he is nothing. I want him arrested for attempted grand larceny and fraud. I want him to sign the divorce papers in a prison cell, not on a beach. Let the status remain pending. I commanded, my voice regaining its steel. Let him think he has won. Let him walk into that bank believing he is minutes away from destroying me. The system requires a retinal scan, right? Well, I have the original retinas. He has a copy. I am betting my entire empire that the original beats the copy. But Victoria? Marcus argued, his voice rising with desperation. If he walks in there and the system accepts his fake scan before you arrive, the money is gone. You are betting $50 million on a race across the Atlantic. I am betting on myself, I corrected him. I have never lost a race that mattered. And Marcus, if he does manage to initiate the transfer before I get there, I trust you to crash the banking system, create a denial of service attack on the bank's internal server, if you have to. Buy me time, but do not cancel the transfer. Let the bait hang there." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Marcus breathing heavy, deliberating. Finally he sighed, the sound of a man who knew he couldn't change my mind. "You are terrifying, Victoria. You know that." "Okay, I will leave the transfer pending. I will set up a monitoring script. If the status changes to processing, I will trigger a level 5 security alert, which should delay the transaction by 10 minutes for manual review. That is all the buffer I can give you. 10 minutes. That is all I need," I said. I checked my watch. The flight time to Rome was tight but feasible. I walked over to the elevator where Julian was waiting, holding his small leather bag. He looked at me and I saw the question in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. "You could just stop him from here. Why fly all the way there to confront him?" "Because, Julian," I said, pressing the call button for the elevator, stepping into the private foyer, taking a moment to check my reflection in the mirror, seeing not a victim, but a hunter. Revenge is not about stopping the bad thing from happening. It is about making sure the person who did it pays a price they can never afford. He wants to bankrupt me, so I am going to morally and legally bankrupt him. He wants to take my future, so I am going to take his freedom. The elevator doors slid open, revealing my private security detail waiting in the lobby. "Let's go," I said, stepping inside. "The race is on." As the elevator descended, taking me away from the sanctuary of my home and toward the tarmac where my jet waited, I felt a strange sense of peace. The fear of losing the money had evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard determination of execution. Jason had made the mistake of thinking I was just a source of funds. He forgot that I was the one who generated them. He was about to learn that you never go to war with the person who controls the logistics. The money was just numbers on a screen. The real currency tonight was time, and I was about to spend every second I had to ensure his total destruction. The rain was falling in sheets over Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, but I barely felt a drop as my driver opened the umbrella and escorted me from the armored SUV to the awaiting staircase of my company's Gulfstream G650ER. This aircraft was not just a luxury vehicle, it was a time machine, capable of flying near the speed of sound at Mach 0.925. It could cut the flight time to Rome down significantly, giving me the critical window I needed to intercept Jason commercial airliners like the one my husband was currently trapped on, flew slower and followed rigid designated flight paths. My pilots, however, had filed a direct high-altitude flight plan that would slice through the jet stream like a knife. Julian trailed behind me, clutching his small leather bag, looking at the sleek white fuselage of the jet with wide disbelief. Had spent the last 6 months living in the shadow of wealth, pretending to be rich, while hiding in a guest room. Now he was about to experience the reality of it. The moment we stepped inside the cabin, the stewardess took our coats and handed me a glass of mineral water without me having to ask. She didn't look twice at Julian, even though he was the spitting image of the man she had flown with dozens of times. My staff was trained to be discreet, and they knew better than to ask why Mr. Brooks looked like he had slept in a dumpster. "We are wheels up in 5 minutes," Mrs. Brooks, the captain, announced over the intercom. I settled into the cream-colored leather seat and signaled for Julian to sit across from me. He sank into the plush upholstery, touching the wood veneer of the table as if he expected it to disappear. "Take a good look, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the soft hum of the auxiliary power unit. "This is the difference between the life Jason promised you and the life he actually lives. He flies first class on commercial airlines because he needs people to see him. He needs an audience to validate his status. I fly private because I value time over attention. And right now, time is the only currency that matters." As the engines roared to life and we rocketed into the night sky, leaving the lights of New York behind, I wasted no time. The flight was 6.5 hours, and I had to turn a nervous gambling addict into a corporate shark. In that time frame, I stood up and walked to the rear of the cabin where the master bathroom was located. "Come here, Julian," I commanded. He followed me obediently. The bathroom was lined with mirrors, and under the bright LED lights, the flaws in his disguise were obvious. He had Jason's face, but he had a 3-day stubble that looked unkempt, not rugged. His hair was slightly too long at the back, and his skin looked gray from poor diet and stress. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the vanity stool. I opened the amenity kit and pulled out a straight razor and a hot towel. This wasn't just a makeover. This was a reconstruction. I lathered the shaving cream onto his face, my hands steady and precise. Julian flinched as the cold steel of the razor touched his throat, but I held his chin firmly. "Do not move," I whispered. "I am not going to cut you unless you give me a reason to." I scraped away the stubble, revealing the sharp jawline that he shared with my husband. But as I worked, I began to reshape him. Jason had a habit of wearing a goatee when he wanted to look artistic. I shaved Julian clean, smooth, and severe. The face looking back from the mirror was no longer the face of a man who hid in guest rooms. It was the face of a man who made hard decisions. "Wash up," I said, handing him a bottle of luxury toner. "When you come out, we are going to fix your wardrobe." I had brought a garment bag from the penthouse. Inside was one of Jason's suits, but not just any suit. It was a charcoal gray, three-piece suit from Savile Row tailored to perfection. It was the suit Jason had worn on our wedding day, the one he claimed was too tight now because he had gained muscle, though we both knew it was just soft living. I tossed it onto the seat along with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie in a deep blood red. "Put this on," I said, "and don't just wear it. Own it." When Julian stepped out of the bathroom, 10 minutes later the transformation was startling. The suit fit him perfectly, perhaps even better than it fit Jason, because Julian was leaner, hungrier. He stood taller, the structure of the jacket forcing his shoulders back, but he still moved like a servant. He fidgeted with his cuffs and looked at the floor. "Stop," I said, sharp as a whip crack. Julian froze, looking up at me. "Do not fidget." I walked over to him, circling him like a predator inspecting prey. Jason is arrogant, but he is also insecure. He laughs too loud. He smiles too much because he wants people to like him. He wants to be part of the club. You are going to be different. You are going to be the man Jason wishes he was. I stood in front of him, forcing him to make eye contact. Listen to me carefully. When we walk into that bank, you do not smile. You do not try to charm the receptionist. You look bored. You look like being there is a massive inconvenience to your schedule because your time is worth more than their entire vault. Do you understand? Money isn't about flashing cash. Julian Riel. Power is silence. It is the ability to walk into a room and have the temperature drop because everyone is waiting to see what you will do. Julian nodded slowly, straightening his spine. I practiced the walk with him up and down the aisle of the jet at 45,000 feet. I taught him how to check his watch with a dismissive flick of the wrist. I taught him how to look through people, not at them. Jason looks at people to see if they are admiring him, I said. You look at people to assess their utility. If they are not useful, they do not exist. For the next 4 hours, we ran drills. I played the role of the bank manager, the police officer. The confused Mistress Julian stumbled at first, his voice cracking, his old habits surfacing. But the more he wore the suit, the more he drank the scotch. I allowed him, the more he began to change. It was intoxicating for him. He had spent his life losing, owing, running. Now he was flying in a private jet, wearing a $5,000 suit, being coached by a billionaire CEO. I could see the addiction shifting. He was trading the rush of the roulette wheel for the rush of authority. By the time we were crossing the coast of France, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the horizon in hues of violet and gold. Julian sat by the window staring out at the clouds, his reflection in the glass looking ghostly and formidable. He turned to me, and for the first time he didn't look like a duplicate. He looked like an upgrade. "I feel different," he said quietly, his voice dropping into a lower register, exactly how I had taught him. "You feel powerful," I corrected him, "and that is dangerous, but remember, Julian, that power is on loan. It belongs to me. You are just wearing it for the day. Do not forget that I checked the flight tracker on the bulkhead monitor. We were cutting across the Alps, descending toward Rome. We had made good time. The tailwinds had been favorable. Jason's commercial flight was currently circling in a holding pattern due to air traffic congestion. A little delay. My team might have nudged the control tower to implement. We were going to land 45 minutes before him. I stood up and smoothed my skirt, ready for the final act. The pieces were set. The logistics had been executed with military precision. I had taken a liability and turned him into a weapon. The man sitting across from me was no longer Julian the debtor. He was Jason Brooks, version 2.0, patched and optimized for destruction. As the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, I looked at my creation and smiled. "You are ready," I said. "Let's go introduce you to your brother." While I was teaching a con artist how to walk like a CEO 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, my sister Maya was executing the next phase of our plan with surgical precision. From her command seat in the cockpit of the Boeing 787, she had a godlike view of the horizon and total control over the environment inside the tube. Behind her in the first-class cabin, Jason was starting to crack, and she decided it was time to shatter him completely. Maya reached for the overhead comms panel and keyed the microphone. Her voice was calm, authoritative, the voice of a professional who had flown through typhoons. But behind that cool exterior was the fierce protectiveness of a sister who knew exactly what the man in Seat 1A had done. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bennett again. We are approaching a sector of high-altitude electromagnetic interference due to some unexpected solar flare activity. It is nothing to worry about regarding the safety of the aircraft, but unfortunately it means we have to temporarily disable the onboard Wi-Fi and satellite phone connections to protect our navigation systems. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts, as we might experience some chop. The crew will be suspending service for the next 20 minutes. Thank you for your patience." She flicked a switch, and instantly the cabin internet went dark. The connection symbol on every screen in the plane vanished, replaced by a buffering circle. Down in Seat 1, Jason stared at his phone as if it had just betrayed him. He had been in the middle of refreshing his encrypted messaging app, waiting for a confirmation from Julian that the coast was clear back in New York. He was also trying to log into the Swiss bank's mobile portal to check if the pending status had shifted. The spinning wheel of death on his screen froze his blood. He tapped the glass furiously, his fingernails clicking against the screen with increasing desperation. "Come on. Come on," he muttered under his breath, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple and soaking into his collar. This loss of connection was not just an inconvenience for him, it was a catastrophe. Jason lived his life on a tightrope of deceit, and communication was his balancing pole. Without it, he was plummeting into the dark. He didn't know if I had come home early. He didn't know if Julian was still sticking to the script. He didn't know if the bank had flagged the transfer. Silence was his enemy, and Maya had just wrapped him in a blanket of it. Beside him, Tiffany let out a dramatic sigh, dropping her phone onto her lap. "Great, just great. I was in the middle of uploading a story. Jason, seriously, this airline is the worst. You said this was top-tier luxury." She looked over at him, expecting him to agree to join her in her petty complaint. But Jason wasn't listening. He was hunched over, clutching his leather briefcase to his chest, like a life preserver. His knuckles were white. "Jason," Tiffany said louder, poking his arm. "Are you even listening to me?" I said. "The Wi-Fi is down." "Put Wi-Fi is the phone away. Talk to me. We are supposed to be celebrating, remember? You promised me a Roman holiday, not a business trip." Jason snapped his head toward her, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Not now, Tiffany!" He hissed, his voice harsh enough that the elderly couple across the aisle looked over in alarm. "I have to monitor this. It is a $50 million transaction. Do you understand what that means? If I miss a notification because of this stupid solar flare, we lose everything." Tiffany recoiled, hurt, flashing across her face. "You are obsessed," she whispered. "You have been staring at that briefcase and that phone since we took off. What is in there, Jason? You said you were done with work. You said you were leaving her, leaving the stress behind. But you are more stressed now than when you are with her." "Shut up," Jason growled, turning back to his useless phone, attempting to toggle the airplane mode on and off, praying for a single bar of signal. "Just shut up and let me think." The plane gave a sudden violent lurch. Maya had manually adjusted the trim just enough to create a sensation of dropping a few feet. It was perfectly safe. But to a nervous passenger, it felt like the floor had vanished. Jason gasped his grip on the briefcase, tightening even further. He pulled it onto his lap, wrapping both arms around it, curling his body over the leather surface, purely instinctively, protecting the forged documents inside. Over his own mistress, Tiffany watched this display with growing disgust. She saw a man who was not a powerful executive, but a terrified rat guarding a piece of cheese. She reached out her hand, hovering over the briefcase. "Jason, give me that. Put it in the overhead bin. You are acting like a lunatic. You are scaring people. Don't touch it," he screamed. The sound tore through the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin. It wasn't just a shout. It was a shriek of pure paranoia. He shoved Tiffany's hand away with such force that he knocked into her tray table. On that table sat a full glass of premium red wine, a heavy, bold Shiraz that Aerolux was famous for. The glass tipped in slow motion, tumbling off the edge of the tray and splashing directly onto Jason's lap. The dark red liquid soaked instantly into the fabric of his beige Italian trousers, spreading like a gunshot wound across his groin and thighs. It splattered onto the leather briefcase he loved so much and sprayed up onto his white dress shirt. Jason froze, looking down at the spreading stain. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every passenger in the first 4 rows turned to look. The flight attendant who had been securing the galley hurried down the aisle, her face a mask of professional concern, asking if everything was all right. But Jason didn't hear her. He looked at the stain, and then he looked at Tiffany with pure hatred. "You stupid cow!" he shouted, scrambling to stand up, forgetting the seatbelt sign was on. "Look what you did. This is a $3,000 suit. I have to wear this to the bank tomorrow." Tiffany stood up too, her face burning with humiliation, but her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. Jason, you pushed me. You are the one acting like a psycho over a briefcase." She grabbed a napkin and threw it at him, hitting him in the chest. "Clean it up yourself." "Sit down, sir." The flight attendant ordered, her voice stern, now abandoning the customer service sweetness. "We are in active turbulence. You need to sit down immediately." Jason looked around the cabin, realizing for the first time that he was the center of attention. The elderly woman across the aisle was shaking her head in disapproval. A businessman 2 rows back was filming the entire meltdown on his phone, and the flight attendant looked ready to call the air marshal. He was wet, sticky, and humiliated. The red wine looked remarkably like blood on his clothes, a visual metaphor for the crime he was committing. He sank back into his seat, defeated and furious. He tried to wipe the wine off his briefcase first, ignoring his pants, ensuring the liquid hadn't seeped into the zippers, hadn't touched the precious papers inside. Tiffany turned her body away from him, staring out the window at the dark clouds, tears of embarrassment stinging her eyes. The romantic getaway was dead. The partnership was fracturing. Up in the cockpit, Maya watched the cabin monitor, a small screen that showed a live feed of the passenger area. She saw Jason frantically dabbing at his crotch, saw the distance between him and Tiffany, saw the utter chaos she had orchestrated with a simple flip of a switch. She smiled grimly and keyed her radio, not to the passengers this time, but to the private channel connected to my jet. "Target is broken," she said softly. "Broken, wet, and isolated. He is all yours. Victoria." I received the message just as my Gulfstream began its final approach toward Rome. I looked at Julian, who was sitting impeccably in his suit, calm and ready. Jason was arriving in Rome looking like a disaster. I was arriving with a king. The turbulence was over for Maya, but for Jason, the storm was just making landfall. The Gulfstream G650 touched down on the private runway at Ciampino Airport exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes before the scheduled arrival of Jason's commercial flight at Fiumicino. The difference between the 2 airports was the difference between our lives. Ciampino was quiet, discreet, and efficient, servicing diplomats and billionaires, while Fiumicino was a chaotic hive of tourists and lines. As the cabin door opened, the warm Italian morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and exhaust. I didn't stop to admire the sunrise over the Roman hills. I walked down the stairs with the momentum of a woman on a crusade. Julian followed close behind, struggling to match my pace in his new shoes, looking around nervously as if he expected the carabinieri to jump out from behind a hangar. My driver was already waiting beside a black, armored Mercedes S-Class, standing at attention. He opened the back door without a word. I slid onto the leather seat, and Julian scrambled in beside me. The car pulled away instantly, bypassing the main terminal and slipping through a private security gate. My passport had been pre-cleared digitally, a perk of being one of the largest foreign investors in Italian maritime infrastructure. While Jason would be standing in a customs line for 45 minutes being jostled by backpackers, I was already speeding down the Via Appia Antica toward the heart of the city. I checked the flight tracker app on my phone. Jason's plane was just beginning its descent, circling over the Mediterranean, waiting for a landing slot. Maya's little nudge to air traffic control had worked perfectly. He was delayed, frustrated, and likely panicked. I showed the screen to Julian, who was staring out the window at the ancient aqueducts rushing by. "Look at that, Julian," I said softly. "He is circling in the sky, helpless. We are on the ground, in control. Remember that feeling when we walked through those doors?" We arrived at the Via Veneto. 20 minutes later, stopping in front of a building that looked more like a fortress than a bank. The facade was heavy stone dating back to the Renaissance, with iron bars over the lower windows and a discreet brass plaque that simply read, Banca Privata di Roma. This was not a bank for checking accounts or mortgages. This was a vault for old European money and the select few Americans wealthy enough to be invited inside. I adjusted my blazer, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and turned to Julian. "Listen to me," I commanded. "You are going to wait in the director's private anteroom. You do not come out until I say the word. You do not speak to the staff. You sit there, you drink water, and you read a magazine. If anyone asks, you are my security consultant checking the perimeter. Do you understand?" Julian nodded, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked terrifyingly like Jason in that suit, but his eyes were still searching for my approval. "Good," I said. "Let's go." The security guards at the entrance recognized me immediately. One of them touched the brim of his hat. "Buongiorno, Signora Brooks. Director Moretti is expecting you." I nodded, breezing past the metal detectors that they graciously turned off for my arrival. The interior of the bank was silent and cool, smelling of beeswax and old paper. We were ushered directly into the main office, a cavernous room with high ceilings and a view of the American embassy across the street. Stefano Moretti, the bank director, stood up from behind his massive antique desk. He was a man in his 60s, impeccable in a navy suit with silver hair and the kind of charm that cost money. "Victoria, my dear," he said, coming around the desk to kiss my cheeks. "What a surprise. Usually you give us weeks of notice before a visit. Is everything all right regarding the merger?" I signaled for Julian to go into the adjoining room and waited until the heavy oak door clicked shut before I turned my attention to Stefano. I let my shoulders slump slightly. Calculated display of vulnerability that I rarely showed Stefano. I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing, "I wish I was here for business, but I am here for a family tragedy." Stefano's face instantly shifted to a mask of concern. "Please, sit down. Victoria espresso water." "What has happened?" I sat on the edge of the velvet chair, gripping my purse tightly, as if holding myself together. "Stefano, it is Jason," I said, lowering my voice to a whisper. "He is having an episode, a psychotic break. He has stopped taking his medication for his condition." Stefano frowned, confusion clouding his eyes. "Condition? I did not know. Mr. Brooks was ill. We have kept it very private." I lied smoothly, twisting the wedding ring on my finger. "He suffers from severe paranoid schizophrenia, coupled with delusional identity disorder. He believes there is a conspiracy against him. He believes he needs to liquidate our assets to run away from imaginary enemies. For the last week he has been spiraling. He thinks he is a secret agent. He thinks I'm trying to steal his money." Stefano looked horrified, but he was listening intently, banking on the fact that wealthy families often had dark secrets. "Victoria, this is terrible. It gets worse." I continued, leaning in closer. He has fallen under the influence of a young woman named Tiffany. She is not a nurse, Stefano. She is a patient he met during his last stay at the mental health facility. She is feeding his delusions, convincing him that they need to steal $50 million to start a new life in the Cayman Islands. She is dangerous, and she is enabling him. Stefano leaned back in his chair, steepening his fingers. I see. That explains the pending transfer alert we received yesterday. $50 million from the trust. It was flagged because the biometric data seemed slightly off. Usually that happens with stress or drugs. But Victoria, if he comes here, if he provides the scan and the key fob legally, I have a duty to execute the transaction. He is a trustee. This was the moment the trap had to be snapped shut. I reached out and took Stefano's hand, my grip firm. Stefano, I am not asking you to stop him. I am asking you to help me save him. He is landing in an hour. He will come here dragging that poor girl with him, demanding the money. If you block him at the door, he will become violent. He might hurt himself or someone else. Then what do you want us to do? Stefano asked. Let him in, I said, my eyes locking with his. Let him come into this office. Let him sit in that chair. Let him think he has succeeded. Let him scan his eye. But when the system processes the request, I want you to be the one to tell him there is a problem, and then I will come out. You will come out? Stefano asked, glancing at the door where Julian was hiding. Yes, I said, I need to confront him in a safe environment. But Stefano, there is one more thing. Because of his split personality, he might claim that he is not Jason. He might claim that I am the crazy one. He is very convincing. Might even scream that there is another Jason somewhere. That is part of the delusion. You must not listen to him. You must listen only to me. Stefano nodded slowly, trusting the woman who had brought his bank millions in fees over the years, over the husband he had only met twice at cocktail parties. I understand, Victoria. We will follow your lead. We will treat it as a medical emergency, not a banking transaction. I will alert security to be on standby, but invisible. Thank you, Stefano, I said, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain slightly. Outside, the Roman sun was climbing higher, illuminating the busy street below. Somewhere in that traffic, Jason was sitting in a taxi, sweating, panicking, clutching a briefcase full of forged papers, believing he was racing toward freedom. He had no idea that he wasn't racing toward a bank vault. He was racing toward a padded cell of my design. I turned back to Stefano, a sad smile on my face. He should be here soon. Prepare the retinal scanner, Stefano. And please bring an extra chair. I have a feeling he is going to need to sit down when he sees who is waiting for him. I walked into the anteroom where Julian was sitting. He looked up at me, his leg bouncing nervously. Is it done? He asked. I adjusted his tie, tightening the knot until it sat perfectly against his collar. It is done, I said. Now we wait. When that door opens, Julian, you don't have to say a word. You just have to exist. Your existence is the weapon, ready to meet your brother. Julian stood up, smoothing his jacket. Ready, he said. I sat down in the shadows of the anteroom, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in Stefano's office, counting down the minutes. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the audience of one was about to walk through the door. The bells of the church of Santa Maria della Concezione were chiming 9 times as a taxi screeched to a halt in front of the Banca Privata di Roma. Jason stepped out onto the cobblestones of the Via Veneto, adjusting his sunglasses to shield his eyes from the bright Italian morning sun. He looked like a man who was trying very hard to hold onto a crumbling facade. His suit, the one that had been soaked in red wine 9 hours ago, had been hastily dry cleaned at the hotel, but it still carried a faint, stiff scent of chemicals and the ghost of a stain on the lapel. Beside him, Tiffany emerged, looking bored and irritated, hiding behind oversized designer shades, tapping her foot impatiently on the sidewalk. I watched them from the security monitor inside Stefano's office, my hands wrapped around a warm porcelain cup. The screen was high definition, capturing every bead of sweat on Jason's forehead. He reached back into the taxi to grab his briefcase, the leather worn from his nervous gripping. He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest, trying to inflate his ego back to its usual size before marching toward the heavy iron doors of the bank. He was confident. He was arrogant. He believed that the nightmare of the flight was over and that within 30 minutes he would be $50 million richer. He pushed open the doors and strode into the lobby, his heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. The lobby was a cathedral of finance, silent and imposing, with vaulted ceilings and clerks who worked in hushed whispers. Jason approached the main reception desk where a young woman named Alessandra was waiting. She had been briefed by Stefano, and she played her part perfectly. She didn't look up immediately, letting Jason stand there for a full 10 seconds, a subtle power move that made his jaw tighten. "Excuse me," Jason said, his voice booming a little too loudly in the quiet space. "I am Jason Brooks. I have an appointment for a transaction. The trust withdrawal." Alessandra looked up slowly over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was blank, entirely devoid of the recognition Jason craved. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." She checked her computer screen, typing slowly, deliberately wasting time. "We have the notification of the pending transfer. However, as you know, for a sum of this magnitude, strictly adhering to the security protocol is mandatory. We require the physical biometric verification to release the funds from the Swiss holding account." Jason smirked, leaning his elbow on the counter, swinging the briefcase slightly. "Of course I know the protocol. I wrote the protocol. Just point me to the scanner, sweetheart. We have a plane to catch." Alessandra gestured to a heavy steel door to the right of the desk. "Please proceed to the biometric station. The system is online." Jason turned to Tiffany, giving her a wink that made my stomach turn. "See, Tiff," he said. "Easy. Just a quick eye scan, and then we are shopping on the Spanish Steps before lunch." Tiffany didn't smile back. She just crossed her arms, looking around the bank with suspicion, clearly wondering why the staff was staring at them so intensely. Jason walked up to the retinal scanner, a sleek, black device mounted on the wall at eye level. This was the moment of truth. The scanner was linked directly to the bank's central server, which Marcus had intercepted from his basement in Washington, D.C. The moment Jason leaned in, Marcus would catch the data packet, and instead of sending it to the verification database, he would feed it into a corruption loop. Jason grabbed the handles on either side of the machine and pressed his face against the visor. He kept his eyes wide open, staring into the red light, waiting for the familiar beep of acceptance. He waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. The machine made a low grinding noise, followed by a harsh buzzing sound. The small screen above the visor flashed red identity not verified system error. Jason pulled back, blinking rapidly. What he muttered, rubbing his eyes. He looked at Alessandra. "The machine is broken. It didn't take." Alessandra didn't move from her seat. "Please try again." "Mr. Brooks, sometimes fatigue or dehydration from a long flight can alter the vascular pattern of the retina. Ensure your eyes are wide open and you are standing still." "I am standing still." Jason snapped, his anxiety spiking. He leaned in again, pressing his face so hard against the rubber seal that it left a mark. He held his breath, willing the machine to recognize him, willing the money to be released. Marcus was playing with him now, back in the U.S., My brother-in-law was probably watching the data stream and rejecting it manually, giving Jason a glimmer of hope before crushing it again. The red light scanned his eye. The machine whirred. It seemed to process for a moment, the green light flickering briefly before slamming back to red. Access denied, biometric mismatch. Jason slammed his hand against the wall. Damn it! He spun around, his face flushed with anger and panic. This is ridiculous. It is me. Look at me. I am Jason Brooks. I have been here before. I know the director. Why isn't this working? Tiffany stepped forward, her voice shrill. Jason, what is going on, you said? This was foolproof. Why is the machine rejecting you? Do you even have access to this money? Of course I have access, Jason yelled, his voice echoing off the marble walls, forcing the other customers to look up in alarm. It is the machine. It is glitching, or maybe the network is down. He turned back to Alessandra, pointing a shaking finger at her. "Your equipment is faulty. Call the IT department. Override it manually. I have the key fob right here." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the digital security token I stole from my safe. He held it up, shaking it in Alessandra's face. "See? I have the physical token. Punch in the code." "I cannot do that, sir," Alessandra said, her voice cool and professional. "The retinal scan is the primary key. The token is secondary. Without the biometric match, the system locks the account automatically. It is a security feature to prevent identity theft." "Identity theft." Jason laughed, a sound that bordered on hysterical. "Who is going to steal my identity?" "I am me." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up with the careful styling he had done in the hotel bathroom. "Listen to me. I am not leaving until this transfer goes through. I want to see the director. I want to see Stefano Moretti right now." "Mr. Moretti is in a meeting," Alessandra said. "I don't care," Jason shouted, slamming his briefcase onto the counter. "I am a trustee of the Vanguard account. I manage $50 million in this bank. You get Stefano out here, or I will pull every cent we have in this institution and move it to the Caymans. Do you hear me? Get him." Now I watched all of this from the office, sipping my espresso, feeling a cold satisfaction. Jason was unraveling exactly as I had predicted. He was used to bullying his way through life using his volume and his entitlement to get what he wanted. But machines don't care about entitlement, and a bank that holds billions of dollars doesn't fear a man in a stained suit. Alessandra looked down at her phone where I had just sent a text message. "Let him in." "Very well, Mr. Brooks," Alessandra said, standing up, picking up a key card. "If you insist, I will take you to Director Moretti's private office. But I must warn you, he does not like to be disturbed." "Fine," Jason grunted, grabbing his briefcase. "Come on, Tiffany." Tiffany hesitated, looking at the door toward the exit. "Jason, maybe we should just go. Maybe we can come back tomorrow." "We are not coming back tomorrow," Jason hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her along. "We are finishing this now." They followed Alessandra down the long corridor, lined with oil paintings of serious-looking men from the 19th century. The hallway was dimly lit, designed to make visitors feel the weight of history and money. Jason walked fast, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He was rehearsing what he would say to Stefano. He would charm him. He would joke about the faulty technology. He would blame the flight. He would do whatever it took to get that signature. Alessandra stopped in front of the double oak doors at the end of the hall. "Director, Moretti is inside," she said, swiping her card. The lock clicked open with a heavy thud. Alessandra didn't open the door. She stepped back, gesturing for Jason to enter. Jason fixed his tie, smoothed his jacket, and took a deep breath. He pushed the doors open, stepping into the expansive office with Tiffany trailing behind him like a reluctant shadow. The office was magnificent, bathed in the golden light of Rome. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and the furniture was antique mahogany. In the center of the room, facing the large window that overlooked the street, sat the director's massive, high-backed leather chair. The chair was turned away from the door, facing the view, so all Jason could see was the back of the headrest and a hand resting on the armrest, holding a delicate espresso cup. "Stefano," Jason called out, stepping further into the room, putting on his best fake laugh. "My God, man, your security system is absolute garbage. You need to fire your tech vendor. I have been standing out there for 20 minutes trying to give you business, and your machine treats me like a criminal." The chair didn't move. The hand holding the cup remained perfectly still. Jason continued walking toward the desk, his confidence wavering slightly at the lack of response. "Stefano, are you listening to me? I know I didn't make an appointment, but this is an emergency. The transfer is pending. I just need your authorization code to bypass the scanner. I have the girl with me, the one I told you about." Tiffany bristled at being called the girl, but she stayed silent, looking around the room nervously. Jason reached the desk, placing his hands on the polished wood, leaning over Stefano. "Stop ignoring me. I am serious. I need that money released." Now, I took a slow sip of the espresso, savoring the bitterness. Then I placed the cup down on the saucer with a deliberate clink. I cleared my throat, a sound that made Jason freeze instantly. It wasn't a man's throat. Clear, it was distinctly feminine, distinctly familiar. Jason pulled back his hands, leaving sweaty palm prints on the mahogany. "Who is that?" he whispered. I pressed my foot against the floor and slowly swiveled the heavy leather chair around. The motion was smooth and silent, revealing me inch by inch. First the knees crossed elegantly in a pencil skirt, then the hands resting calmly on the armrest, then the charcoal blazer, and finally my face. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't frowning. I was looking at him with the same expression I wore when I terminated a failing contract. Total, absolute indifference. Jason stopped breathing. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His eyes bulged, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual input standing in front of him. He staggered back a step, bumping into Tiffany, who let out a small scream when she saw me. I picked up the espresso cup again and took another sip, my eyes never leaving Jason's face. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice soft, but filling the silence of the room like a poisonous fog. "How was the flight I heard? There was some terrible turbulence over the Atlantic. Did you manage to get that stain out of your trousers?" Jason stared at me across the mahogany desk, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the harsh, ragged breathing of a man whose reality had just fractured. The arrogant sneer that usually defined his face had dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes darted from my face to the espresso cup in my hand, and then to Stefano, who was watching him with a mixture of pity and professional wariness. The color had drained from Jason's face, leaving him a sickly gray hue that clashed horribly with the red wine stain on his trousers. "You," Jason stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You are in New York. I saw you. I saw you on the camera. You were at home." I didn't answer. I simply raised an eyebrow and took another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The silence stretched tight as a piano wire, and then it snapped. Jason's shock turned into a blind, animalistic rage. He lunged toward the desk, his hands clawing at the air as if he wanted to strangle the truth out of me. "You set me up!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You witch! You froze the account. You are trying to ruin me!" Before he could take 2 steps, the security guard who had been standing discreetly in the corner moved with a speed that belied his size. He stepped in front of Jason, blocking his path with a wall of muscle. Jason slammed into the guard and bounced back, stumbling over his own feet and nearly crashing into Tiffany. She let out a sharp cry and scrambled backward, her high heels skidding on the polished floor. Sir Director Moretti said, his voice booming with authority, "Please restrain yourself, or I will have you removed by the Carabinieri. This is a place of business, not a wrestling ring." "I am not the problem here," Jason yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is the problem. She is hacking the system. She is trying to steal my money. I am Jason Brooks. I am the trustee." I set my cup down with a soft clink and looked past Jason toward the side door of the office, the one that led to the private anteroom. "It is time," I said softly, not to Jason, but to the room at large. The side door clicked open. The sound was small, but in the tense atmosphere of the office, it sounded like a gavel coming down. Everyone turned to look. Jason turned, expecting perhaps a lawyer or a police officer, but what walked out of that room was his own worst nightmare. Julian stepped into the light. He was wearing the charcoal gray Savile Row suit I had dressed him in on the jet, the fabric draped perfectly over his frame, emphasizing a posture that was upright, commanding and utterly relaxed. He had one hand in his pocket and the other adjusting his silk cufflink with a casual, practiced grace. He didn't look like an imposter. He looked like the man Jason had always pretended to be, but never quite achieved. Julian was clean-shaven, his skin glowing with health and confidence, while Jason looked sweaty, disheveled, and frantic. The resemblance was terrifying even to me, who had orchestrated it. But the difference was in the energy Jason radiated, chaos and desperation. Julian radiated control and power. It was like looking at a cheap photocopy next to the original high-definition master. Julian walked past Jason without even looking at him, dismissing him entirely with his body language. He walked straight to me, circling the desk and placing a hand gently on my shoulder. His touch was firm and possessive, exactly how a husband would touch his wife in a room full of strangers. "I am sorry to keep you waiting." "Darling," Julian said, his voice dropping into that low, smooth register we had practiced on the plane. "I was just reviewing the security perimeter with the team outside." He looked down at me with a warmth that felt disturbingly real. "Is everything all right in here?" Jason made a sound that was somewhere between a choke and a sob. He stared at Julian, his eyes bulging so far out of his head I thought they might burst. He looked at Julian's face, then down at his own hands, then back at Julian. It was a moment of total psychological dissociation. He was seeing himself, but a better, richer version of himself. "Who are you?" Jason whispered, his voice trembling violently. "Who is that?" Julian turned slowly to face Jason. He looked him up and down, inspecting the wine-stained trousers, the crumpled shirt, and the sweating face with an expression of mild distaste. Then he delivered the line that would drive the final nail into Jason's coffin. "Excuse me," Julian said, his tone polite but icy. "Who are you, and why are you impersonating me?" Jason fell back as if he had been punched. He grabbed the edge of a chair to steady himself. "No," he gasped. "No, no, no. This isn't real. This is a trick." He looked at Tiffany frantically. "Tiff, tell them who I am. You know me. We flew here together. Tell them I am Jason." Tiffany was pressed against the bookshelf, her face pale. She looked at Jason, the man who had screamed at her on the plane, the man who had obsessively clutched his briefcase, the man who was currently sweating through his shirt. Then she looked at Julian. The man standing next to me was the epitome of success. He was calm, he was handsome, and he was looking at Jason with the confused pity one might show a homeless person claiming to be Napoleon. "I don't know," Tiffany whispered, her voice shaking. She looked at Julian, expecting to see the imposter, but her eyes were playing tricks on her fear. In the face of such confidence, her own memory began to warp. She remembered Jason acting strange on the flight. She remembered the paranoia. Maybe this was why. Maybe the man she had been sleeping with was the crazy one, just like the director had said. "Tiffany," Jason screamed, "you know me. We have been together for 6 months. I don't know who you are." Tiffany cried out, stepping further away from him. "You are acting crazy. You have been acting crazy all day. Look at him." She pointed at Julian. "He looks exactly like you, but he is normal." Julian stepped forward slightly, placing himself between me and Jason. "I suggest you leave, sir," Julian said, his voice hardening. "Before you embarrass yourself further, it is clear you are unwell. Impersonating a bank trustee is a serious crime in Italy. My wife and I are very patient people, but our patience has limits." "My wife," Jason howled. The sound tore from his throat, raw and painful. "She is my wife. I married her. I live in the penthouse. I signed the papers." He scrambled for his briefcase, fumbling with the latches. "Look, I have the papers. I have the proof." He threw the briefcase open, dumping the contents onto the floor. Stacks of documents, spilled out papers he had spent months forging. But as they scattered across the Persian rug, they looked pathetic, just piles of paper in the face of the living, breathing reality standing next to me. Director Moretti stood up, his face grim. "This has gone on long enough." He pressed a button on his desk. "Security, please escort this individual out immediately, and call the police. We have a case of attempted fraud and harassment." 2 more guards entered the room, moving toward Jason. Jason backed away, stumbling over his own briefcase. "No, don't touch me. I am Jason Brooks. I have the retinal scan." It was a glitch. The machine was broken. "Check the machine again." "Sir, please come with us," the lead guard said, gripping Jason's arm. Jason thrashed, trying to pull away. "Get off me!" He pointed at Julian. "That is the fake." "He is an actor. His name is Julian. He is a gambling addict from New Jersey. I hired him. Ask him. Ask him about the debts." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply leaned down and whispered something in my ear, causing me to let out a small, soft laugh. It was a calculated move. We looked like a couple sharing a private joke in the middle of a dinner party, completely unbothered by the waiter dropping a tray. The visual of us standing together, united and impeccable against the backdrop of Jason's hysteria was powerful. It rewrote the narrative in the room. Even Tiffany was looking at us with envy. She saw the way Julian held himself, the way I looked at him, and she realized she had picked the losing side. Jason saw it too. He saw Tiffany looking at Julian with that hungry expression he knew so well. He saw the director apologizing to me with his eyes, and he saw Julian wearing his suit better than he ever had. The reality he had built, the lies he had told, they were all collapsing inward, crushing him. "I am the real one," Jason screamed, as the guards dragged him backward toward the door. "I am the real Jason Brooks. You are stealing my life, Victoria. Tell them it is me." I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt. I walked over to where Jason was being held. I stopped inches from his face, looking deep into his eyes. The eyes were the only thing that was the same, but even those were different now, filled with a terror that I had put there. "I am sorry, sir," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I have never seen you before in my life. My husband is standing right there." I gestured to Julian. Jason let out a sound of pure anguish, a broken sob that echoed off the high ceilings. "You are killing me," he whispered. "You are erasing me." I didn't answer. I just turned my back on him, walking back to Julian's side. Julian put his arm around my waist, and I leaned into him, the perfect picture of marital bliss. "Take him away," Director Moretti ordered. As they dragged Jason out of the room, his shoes scuffing against the marble, he continued to scream, but the fight had gone out of him. He sounded less like a man demanding justice and more like the madman I had described, simply a patient having a very bad day. Tiffany stood by the bookshelf trembling, not knowing whether to follow him or stay. When the heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off Jason's screams, the silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and sweet. "I am terribly sorry about that, Mr. Brooks, Director," Moretti said, looking at Julian with genuine apology. "We had no idea the imposter would be so aggressive. It must have been very distressing for you to see someone trying to mimic your appearance like that." Julian sighed, adjusting his cufflink. "It happens more often than you would think, Stefano. Success attracts all kinds of parasites. We are just glad no one was hurt." He looked down at me, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Right, darling." "Right," I said, looking at the closed door. "The imposter is gone now, Stefano. Shall we discuss the security of the account? I believe we need to update the biometric protocols immediately. Clearly, the current ones are not keeping the riffraff out." Tiffany cleared her throat, taking a hesitant step forward. Excuse me." She looked from me to Julian, her eyes wide behind her sunglasses. I think I made a mistake. I didn't know he was..." Like that, I looked at her coldly. The mistress. The woman who had helped Jason plan my destruction. She was now stranded in a foreign country with a man being hauled off to jail and her meal ticket shredding before her eyes. "You certainly did make a mistake," I said. "But don't worry, the police will want to speak to you too regarding your role in his delusions. I suggest you sit down and wait for them." The trap was complete. Jason was gone, his identity stripped away and handed to a better actor. And in the middle of Rome, I stood with my new husband, ready to rewrite the future. The heavy double doors of the director's office swung open again, but this time it wasn't a bank clerk entering, it was the Carabinieri. The Italian military police moved with a synchronized precision that silenced the room instantly. They were flanked by 2 plainclothes officers holding thick manila folders. Folders that I knew contained every forged signature, every altered PDF, and every digital footprint Jason had left behind. Thanks to Marcus's forensic speed back in Washington, D.C., the room seemed to shrink as the uniforms filled the space, blocking every possible exit and turning the luxurious office into a cage. The lead officer stepped in front of Jason, blocking his path to the lobby. "Jason Brooks," he said, his voice heavily accented but perfectly understandable. "You are under arrest for international wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. We have received digital evidence from the American federal authorities corroborating your attempt to liquidate trust funds illegally via a proxy scheme. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say will be used against you." Jason stopped struggling. The fight drained out of him, leaving him sagging in the grip of the bank guards, who gladly handed him over to the police. He looked down at his wrists as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, sealing his fate. The sound was sharp and final, cutting through the ambient noise of the bank. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on his life forever. He wasn't looking at the police anymore. He was looking at me, his eyes searching for some trace of the woman who used to love him, searching for a lifeline or a hint of mercy. I signaled for Julian to wait by the desk, and I walked over to where my husband stood, shackled. I moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the shift in power. For years, he had made me feel small, managing my appearance, managing my schedule, trying to control my money. Now he was physically restrained, and I was the one walking free. I didn't look angry. I didn't look sad. I looked at him with the clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. I reached out and gently adjusted his collar, which had become crooked during his tantrum. I smoothed the lapel of his wine-stained jacket, brushing off a piece of lint, maintaining eye contact the entire time. He flinched at my touch, expecting a slap, but this was worse than violence. It was pity I leaned in close so only he could hear me, the scent of his fear overpowering his expensive cologne. "You were right, Jason," I whispered, my voice soft and steady. "A successful man really does need a woman worthy of his stature. It is just a pity that you were never successful." I stepped back, watching the light die in his eyes as the realization hit him. He wasn't a victim of a misunderstanding. He was a casualty of his own arrogance, and I was the architect of his fall. The officers hauled him away, and he didn't look back. He was just a prisoner now, another statistic in the justice system. The doors closed behind him, leaving a ringing silence in the office. I turned back to Julian and the director, taking a deep breath of the air that felt cleaner now that he was gone. The cancer had been cut out, and the healing could finally begin. The silence in the office after the heavy oak doors clicked shut was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot or a thunderclap ringing in the ears and heavy in the air in the car. Director Moretti sat back in his chair, looking slightly pale, wiping a sheen of perspiration from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Julian stood by the window, adjusting his cufflinks, seemingly unbothered by the fact that he had just sent his own blood relative to prison, but my attention was focused entirely on the third person left in the room. Tiffany was pressed against the antique bookshelf, trying to make herself as small as physically possible. She was no longer the arrogant woman who had demanded champagne on the flight, or the entitled mistress who had rolled her eyes at bank security. She was a 24-year-old girl who had suddenly realized she was standing in a room with wolves without any armor. Her designer sunglasses were clutched in her hand, and her eyes darted between me and the door, clearly calculating the odds of making a run for it. I stood up slowly and walked toward her. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a rhythmic countdown that made her flinch with every step. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my hand. I simply stopped 2 feet away from her, invading her personal space with a cold, suffocating presence. I looked her up and down, assessing her, the way one assesses a piece of damaged cargo. "Tiffany," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, just flat and professional. "You have a decision to make right now, and I suggest you make it quickly because the police are still in the building processing." "Your boyfriend," Tiffany stammered, her hands trembling violently. "I did not know. I swear, I didn't know he was doing this. He told me it was his money. He told me you were the crazy one. I am just a victim here." "Stop," I said, cutting her off sharply. "Do not insult my intelligence. You knew he was married. You knew he was hiding. You enjoyed the first-class flights and the expensive dinners paid for with my money. You are not a victim. Tiffany, you are an accessory to international wire fraud and identity theft. In Italy, the prison sentence for that can be up to 10 years, depending on the severity of the sum involved. $50 million makes it very severe." She gasped, bringing a hand up to cover her mouth, tears finally spilling over, ruining her makeup. "Please let me go. I will leave. I will never talk to him again. I just want to go home." I reached into my purse and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a boarding pass. I had printed it out on the jet while Julian was shaving. It was my contingency plan for the mistress. I held it out to her, but I didn't let her take it immediately. "This is a ticket back to New York," I said. "It leaves from Fiumicino in 3 hours. It is a one-way ticket." Tiffany reached for it, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much." I pulled the ticket back slightly. "But there is a condition." I continued. "It is an economy class ticket. Middle seat, back row, right near the toilets. It is a 9-hour flight, and when you land, you are going to walk out of that airport and you are never going to mention the name Jason Brooks or Victoria Brooks again. If you ever try to sell a story to a tabloid, if you ever try to post about this on your social media, imply simply that you were here. I will not sue you. I will have you indicted." Marcus, my brother-in-law, has already scraped your digital life. We know about your unpaid parking tickets, your tax evasion on your influencer income, and your little side business selling replicas. We will bury you under so much litigation, you will be paying legal fees for the rest of your life. Do we understand each other? Tiffany nodded furiously, unable to speak. She looked at the ticket as if it were a golden ticket to heaven despite the middle seat assignment. "Good," I said, handing her the paper. "Now get out of my sight before I change my mind and hand you over to the Carabinieri as a co-conspirator." Tiffany grabbed the ticket and practically ran toward the door, stumbling in her heels. She didn't look back at Julian. She didn't look back at the luxury she had chased. She just ran, desperate to escape the orbit of a woman she had severely underestimated. When the door closed behind her, I felt a sense of cleansing. The clutter had been removed. Now only the assets remained. I turned back to Julian and Stefano. The director looked at me with newfound respect. "Victoria, you are formidable," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "I am just protecting my interests." "Stefano," I replied. I checked my watch. The show was over, but there was one final piece of business to conclude regarding the man wearing my husband's face. Julian was watching me warily. He knew his part was done. He had performed perfectly. He had outshone Jason in every metric, but he also knew that he was a loose end. He was a man with a gambling debt and a face that could unlock my bank accounts. He probably expected me to hand him a check and a threat, just like I had done with Tiffany. Or perhaps he feared I would have him arrested too, just to tie up the loop. I walked over to the desk and sat down in the director's chair, signaling for Julian to sit opposite me where Jason had sat only 20 minutes ago. Julian sat down, keeping his posture straight, maintaining the character I had built. "So, Julian," I said, clasping my hands on the desk, "what happens now?" Julian swallowed hard, barely hiding his nervousness. "I suppose I go back to New Jersey," he said quietly. "I take the $50,000 you gave me and I pay off my debts. And I disappear. I promise, Victoria, you will never see me again. I won't cause trouble." I looked at him, studying his face. It was Jason's face, but without the weakness. It was a face that could command a room. I thought about the way he had handled the director, the way he had improvised the dialogue with Jason, the way he had comforted me in front of the guards. He had high emotional intelligence. He had charm, and unlike Jason, he knew what it was like to have nothing, which made him hungry and loyal. "I have a better idea," I said, leaning back in the chair. "New Jersey is too close. And frankly, Julian, you are too talented to waste your life dodging loan sharks in Atlantic City. You are a terrible gambler, but you are an excellent actor. You played the role of the dignified philanthropist husband better than the real one ever did." Julian frowned, confused. You want me to keep acting?" In a manner of speaking, I replied, taking a file from my bag. "Vanguard Logistics has a charitable arm, the Vanguard Foundation. We build schools and clean water systems in developing nations, specifically in regions where we have shipping interests. I need a director of operations for our East Africa branch. It is based in Nairobi. The job involves meeting with local dignitaries, hosting fundraising galas, and being the public face of our humanitarian efforts. It pays $200,000 a year, plus housing and security." Julian stared at me, his mouth falling open slightly. "You want to hire me to be a director in Africa?" "It is a real job, Julian," I said sternly. It requires hard work, but it puts you 6,000 miles away from New York. It puts you in a place where no one knows Jason Brooks, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. You can be the man you pretended to be today. You can be respected, you can be wealthy, but you can never come back to the United States. If you step foot on American soil without my permission, the deal is off, and the fraud charges regarding your impersonation of Jason will be filed immediately. I watched the realization wash over him. It was a golden cage. I was offering him a life of luxury and status, a life he had always dreamed of. But in return, I was exiling him permanently. He would be my ambassador in a continent far away, doing good work for my company while staying safely off my chessboard. Julian looked at his hands, then he looked at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Simply, gratitude. "You are giving me a life," he said. "I am giving you a purpose." I corrected him. "Don't waste it." I stood up, extending my hand. "Welcome to the Vanguard Foundation. Mr. Director, your flight to Nairobi leaves tonight straight from Rome. Your bags will be sent to you. Do not disappoint me." Julian shook my hand, his grip firm and sincere. "Thank you, Victoria. I won't." As Julian left the office, walking tall and purposeful, I felt the final weight lift off my shoulders. Jason was in a cell facing 15 years for fraud. Julian was on his way to a new life in Kenya, serving my company. And I was standing in the center of Rome, the sole owner of my life and my fortune. 6 months later, the air was crisp and clear at 40,000 feet. I sat in the jump seat of the cockpit of a brand new Airbus A350, holding a flute of vintage Dom Perignon. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the clouds in streaks of purple and fire. Maya was in the captain's seat, her hands resting lightly on the controls, monitoring the autopilot. She looked over at me and clinked her glass against mine. "To freedom," she said, smiling. "To precision," I replied, taking a sip of the cold bubbles. We were flying back from a business trip to London. Marcus was on the secure line via the cockpit speakers, his voice sounding cheerful. "Guess who just got promoted to senior lead investigator?" he announced. I smiled. "Congratulations, Marcus. I assume the Brooks case had something to do with it." You could say that Marcus laughed. The Bureau loved the dossier. It was the cleanest financial prosecution they have seen in a decade. Jason pled guilty last week, 15 years minimum security, but still, prison. And the best part, Victoria, the prenup clause you triggered, the infidelity and criminal misconduct clause. The court awarded you full restitution. He owes you $4 million in legal fees and damages. He is bankrupt for the next 3 lifetimes. I looked out at the horizon, feeling a profound sense of peace. Jason was a memory, a cautionary tale rotting in a cell. Julian was sending me weekly reports from Nairobi, where he was apparently dating a French diplomat and building his 3rd school. He was happy, and more importantly, he was distant. And Tiffany was managing a shoe store in Ohio, terrified to even look at a passport. I turned to the camera, breaking the 4th wall for the final time, looking directly at you, the audience who has walked this path with me. A lot of people think that when a woman discovers her husband's betrayal, she should scream, she should cry, she should burn his clothes on the front lawn. But those people don't understand the true nature of power. Anger is a fire. It burns out quickly. Silence, however, is ice. It preserves, it endures, and it is much, much harder to break. I didn't raise my voice once during this entire war. I simply raised the stakes. I used the tools I had, my intelligence, my family, and my assets, to dismantle a man who thought he could play me for a fool. So remember this: the next time someone underestimates you simply because you are quiet, do not get mad. Get everything. I have one question for you before we sign off. I gave Julian the con artist a second chance and a high-paying job in Africa while I sent my husband to prison. Some people say I was too soft on the doppelganger. Others say it was the perfect way to use a pawn. Do you think I should have punished Julian too, or was hiring him the ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed watching a billionaire CEO take out the trash with a smile, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your bank accounts locked.